All right, so welcome back everybody to another Open Game Data Open Office Hours. So the Open Game Data community is an NSF-funded research incubator working on bringing together a collective of researchers interested in using data generated in and around games to advance our scientific understanding of thinking, learning, and decision making. We've had two primary goals: one, to kind of convene this community and collect this knowledge, and the second one to build some real concrete research infrastructure that will help automate some of these techniques. We have a bunch of resources that exist. So there's the Open Game Data website at Field Day. We have a Slack that we use to coordinate. And then we have these open office hour sessions, which we record and put up online as a set of working examples on how to use data. So how these things usually work, they're kind of variable, but they're inspired by a set of sessions that we used to do at the Statistical Education Research Group at CMU, where somebody, usually a student or a postdoc, would talk about a project they were actively working on. And they would talk with a member of the stats faculty. And essentially, it's like they were going to office hours to ask about, like, here's what I'm trying to do. Here's my model. Let's open up my code book or whatever. But they do it publicly in front of an audience. And you would learn so much sitting in that room, just kind of seeing how experts talk about stuff and think about problems. Um, and so we kind of try to do the same thing here, but with a sort of a game data bent. It's like, what are people working on? What's active? What are people thinking about? How do we want to move this forward? And then we record these things for people to learn from. Some things to keep in mind: these presenters are usually showing something that's work in progress. It's usually not something necessarily finished. And so keep in mind that that can take courage. Our goal is to help the presenter and the community kind of move forward in general, but if anybody sort of raises an idea or a question that you don't understand or know, feel free to raise a hand, chime in, ask a question, because it's about everybody learning as well. And with that, we can hand off to our presenters, Travis and company. You can introduce yourself and I can hand over the share and we can go from there.
Sure, great. And I'll pop in front of the laptop here. So my name is Travis Windleharth. I use he, him, or they, them pronouns. I am a senior researcher at Foundry 10, which you'll hear a little bit more about in a few minutes. And I'm the principal investigator of the STEM design-based research lab. So I work a lot with STEM, but across other teams as well, as you will hear about. And I will pass it over to Raisa.
Yeah, hi, I'm Raisa. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the research coordinator for the STEM design-based research lab here at Foundry 10.
Hi, I'm Jinha Lee. I'm a professor at UW, the other UW Information School. And I lead the lab called the Gamer Group at UW. I'm here at Foundry 10 as a visiting researcher during my sabbatical, trying to help with the Goku project that we'll present today. My background is library and information science, and I do work related to game metadata and preservation. So that is why I am helping with the project, and how I hope to contribute.
Awesome. Good to meet you guys.
Cool.
Good. And so I have joined here. I just have a few slides to introduce Foundry 10 and introduce our project that we're starting. So I'm going to throw this up on the screen now. Let's see here. Can everybody see that?
Yep.
Okay, great. So yeah, this is the Game KO project. You'll see the name in a minute of the full project, but some background about this is, the Gamer Lab I came through. I was Jinha's doctoral student back in the day. Jinha was my advisor, and as you'll see, I'm not sure how familiar you are with that group. A lot of game metadata work comes out of that. That was the genesis of that particular group. I came in and worked on a lot of that, 6 years ago before, moving on and coming to Foundry 10. Experts in knowledge organization in the iSchool there with the lab that Jinha leads. And also there are some connections with the Play Make Learn conference. Actually, we had several colleagues that went this year. You went, Jinha, right? I believe one of you may have met my colleague Suzanne Townsend, or at least Suzanne went to one of your talks. And she went, as well as Meredith Berlin, who presented at Play Make Learn. So a couple of Foundry 10 associated people were there. I've known about it for quite a long time. I would have liked to have gone this year, but it was sandwiched in between Serious Play and our own local PAX West game convention. I hope to come next year. And correct me if I'm wrong, but was this kind of an extension of the earlier GLS or Games Learning Society group or work that was happening at.
Yeah, the founding group of Play Make Learn was all post GLS people, myself included.
That's what I thought. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is great. Yeah. And I've, of course, know that this University of Wisconsin is a shining star in the constellation of groups doing game-related work. So very familiar. So let me just briefly talk about Foundry 10 and who we are, because most people haven't heard of us. Like, who are these folks? So Foundry 10 is an education research organization with a philanthropic focus on expanding ideas about learning and creating direct value for youth. That's our core pitch. In collaboration with a wide range of partners, we surface, evaluate, and share opportunities to better support youth learning, both inside and outside the classroom. Building on more than a decade of impactful work, our unique approach blends applied and experimental research, philanthropy, and education programs rooted in evidence-based best practices. That's our formal statement. Because this is a game-related group, I like to go, touch on the history at least. This, you may or may not be familiar with this, but we have a single funder. There are about 50 to 60 employees here, and we do kind of a range of specialized work. Our single funder is Gabe Newell, CEO of Valve. So about a dozen years ago, he started with a few people in the Valve offices. Foundry 10 started in the Valve offices, and it's just grown and grown. And since then, game-related things were the original focus of Foundry 10, but actually we're just a small part in the overall function and operation of Foundry 10 at this point, but a venerable and old piece of that. Okay, next slide. Oh, there we go. Oops. There we go. We're founded in 2013, and it helps to understand how we're organized a little bit. We're a matrixed organization. So we have 4 pillar teams, we call them. Research is just one of them. So we have research, which all of us work on the research pillar because that's what we do. We also have programs. So we have the ability to work with our core program developers who go out, nonprofits, after school programs, in schools with other educators or just internally, develop programs, refine programs, deploy programs, a lot of face-to-face contact with youth. We have philanthropy, so we do have a funding wing, usually applied direct value for youth. Again, things for after-school programs, classrooms, direct value for youth. And sharing is our media wing. That's the sort of horizontal axis of the matrix, and the vertical axis is we have 4 interest area teams. So anything that we do in Foundry 10 has got to fit within one of these 4 teams. We have a career-connected learning and life skills team. We do a little bit with them, but not much. The team that we are all on is the creativity, design, and play team. So our home pillar is research, but we are on the creativity, design, and play team. That's why the game things and the play things kind of receive a lot of attention. They're all nested here. Colleagues who are not researchers did go to Play Make Learn, like Meredith is a program developer on the programs pillar who went to Play Make Learn. Suzanne is the philanthropy developer on the CDP team. She went to Play Make Learn. So you can see how kind of you have 2 hats you're always wearing in this organization at once. Then we have a health and well-being team, and a team we work a lot with called the Technology, Media, and Information Literacy team. I'm going to pause there. I know that's a lot, but I think especially for this group, it's helpful to know who Foundry 10 is, where we came from, and kind of the work we do. Do y'all have any questions so far before I dig in a little more?
Well, I've got one, which is like, what was Valve's interest in creating Foundry 10?
Well, our CEO was a classroom teacher who was using Portal to teach physics, and Gabe liked it and said, "Hey, do you want to come start run a nonprofit?"
Great answer. That is a great answer.
Yeah. So and that's pretty much how it started. Yeah, we'll actually have Kim Swift, the designer of Portal, coming to do an event with us next month, which is really fun. So it's kind of full circle. But that's how it's cool. Yeah. And we have a lab structure. I won't harp too much on this, but we have the STEM design-based research lab folks. Jim Haas here now is for the year as guest faculty, and all of this work falls within my lab. And as you can see, I mentioned the interest area teams and research lab. We do some research work outside of the team, and we do some teamwork outside of research. But at this little Venn diagram here, this particular project is in that sliver in the middle. Meaning it's a STEM design-based research project, and it's also sponsored by our interest area team, the creativity, design, and play team. And Teams are kind of associated, labs are associated with particular teams, but what you don't really see here is we really work across boundaries quite a bit here, especially the CDP team, Creativity Design Play team, and the STEM DBR lab works a lot with the Technology, Media, and Information Literacy team and the Digital Technologies and Education lab. Like, obviously, we have a lot of overlap. So that's how everything is structured here. Let's just show a few things that we've kind of done. These are just a couple of the more recent things we've done. We're very applied. So we've had a couple of projects. We were just at like PAX West, like I said, which is a consumer facing convention, but we had like a disinformation panel that tapped into several of our partners and pieces of this research. For example, some of the projects we worked on, and in fact, Starbound Secrets. You want to explain a little bit about that, Jenna?
Oh yeah, this is one of the games that we made, one of many games.
Yeah.
But this is particularly targeted for youth, and it is supposed to generate that feeling of like falling down the misinformation rabbit hole. So it features this fictional world where you go and you have to find this cure for your friend, and you have to take this dragon tear, I think. And you have to make some decision about how you feel about these aliens based off of the information that is being fed to you. At some point you have to make a decision about, if you want to wake up a captain and go a certain route or not. So that's how it's made, and like we tested it with the co-design team at UW called Kids Team, which is an intergenerational co-design team that Jason Yip runs. So that's how it was designed. Also with the RSO, the Registered Student Organization at UW, who actually, does Minecraft stuff. So it's really cool.
Yeah. It's another example, just a couple of cards. Scott DeYoung came from Concordia University in Toronto and worked with a local high school teacher, Sean Lee. They developed a game called The Feed. And I'm just showing you this because it's an example of kind of the weird way we work. We were able to fund like the design and the art and the production of this game, which is going out through Teachers for an Informed Public, a group that, does this information literacy with youth. We did some co-design work. Scott led that. He came into our lab, our STEM design-based research cohorts. We gave him sessions. He led it. This is in addition to, of course, other projects that I'm doing. We funded it, and now it's going into production. So this is kind of how we operate. We do research. We do design-based research. We can also do the philanthropic funding of like getting the game out, continuing that kind of work. And we did a panel on this most recently, so you can see a slice of like the partners we work with. I think this just really captured kind of the breadth and connected nature of our work. Again, this is one of our more recent things. We had a game lending library at PAX. We're also recruiting for our cohorts, games for people to play. But we also had, you can see there on that table, like flyers and information about research and our videos and our papers and all of those sorts of things. Okay, now I'm gonna go into the project. That's Foundry 10. Any further questions? Yeah, I think it just helps to understand where we are and where we come from to like ground how we work and what we do. Well, bringing several of these pieces together, we're starting, and we are in the initial phases of the project called Goku, Game Organization for Knowledge Utility. So there's a huge problem that we have seen in the literature. We have seen it in our work with educators. It's something I'm sure you're as familiar with as anybody else, is despite the growing interest in use of games for learning, games can vary widely in quality, learning content, and deployment characteristics, very context sensitive sometimes when and how you can deploy them. What we hear anecdotally over and over with all of our educator network is that, like, how do I find the right games for my class? How do I get the right game for my after school program? How do I know that there's going to be some level of deeper learning rather than a surface level rehash of the concepts that we already read about in the book or I did in the lecture, right? And it's a sticky problem and it's persistent and it's one we've heard a lot. So given our unique nature, I'll talk about that in a moment. We figured this is an interesting problem for us to continue to tackle based on where we are at this point and the connections we have and the work we've done. So our goal with this project is to design, test, and publish a user-centered metadata schema to organize all critical aspects of games for learning so they are searchable, findable, retrievable, and clearly categorized in a system that really gives a lot of power to educators to find what they need for their contexts to a high degree of efficacy, right? So here's just kind of a KO picture on the right, all the different ways and aspects of knowledge organization. It's just symbolic. That's the problem in a nutshell. We're inspired by prior work. So the screen is lagging. Are we still connected?
Yeah, I see it.
Oh, interesting.
Published research.
You're all frozen on the screen for us.
Oh, that happens sometimes.
Okay, that's fine. But you can see like the IEEE loan.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we want to learn from and build on years of prior work. So, just looking at things like this learning object model and their elements, build on published research that have been done in the past about how people have thought about classifying games or educator needs or things like that. Game metadata sources that already exist, International Game Database or any of the commercial or other, systems, even, Board Game Geek, whoever is doing something with metadata. And perhaps most importantly, the game metadata schemas that we have our local and networked expertise on with regard to game metadata itself, specifically inspired by, of course, the video game metadata schema, but also the partnerships that had emerged from that, like GameSip and elsewhere, that have really helped develop robust schemas for video games. However, really grounding the core problem and new set of elements in what would be the most effective way to do this for educators. And then there's some discussion pieces I can add on to that, but that's the project in a nutshell. And I can go back to this slide. Might have to reset the screen here. Very
So
day.
One question I have, you're talking about, you described it as a user-centered metadata. Who's the user? Are you thinking, is it specifically teacher? Are you thinking parent ever? Are you thinking player? Like,
yes, that is a good question. We formally put educators at the center of this, but we sort of think of like 4 personas as relevant. Educators are at the center, both formal and informal educators, but then also caregivers and parents who are interested in it, like librarians who might use this metadata, or cultural organizations for archival purposes, and researchers who might find value in having systems of classification for any work that they might do around this. So educators are centric, but we have those 3 other personas that we're thinking about.
That's great.
And so we're just getting started with this, so just a little bit more information. Jinha started full-time recently. We're in the middle of, doing all of our due diligence pieces, writing our IRB. The way we're working is that we're developing an advisory board. So we have some confirmed members such as Andrew Borman, the librarian archivist at the Strong Museum of Play. We have a couple of educators, of course, who do strong work with this. We have, we're talking to somebody at, what's that?
Right.
Yeah, Greta, go ahead. Greta's at Stanford.
Yeah, she's a metadata librarian at Stanford University.
Yeah, so people that work with game metadata, people that are educators and work with games, and a researcher too. So we're rounding out that board. We're going to be building out, our methodology and things such as that, but it's really going to be on collecting this. The core needs from educators, and a piece of this is very, very interesting to me that I think might be a deeper contribution is that I'm very interested in how models and knowledge models are represented in games, right? You can represent concepts in a number of different ways in the depths of concepts, but the thing we keep hearing over and over and over, and that is articulated in the literature, is that I really don't know how to characterize how the knowledge is represented in this game. And when you look at these core elements of like, how long does it take to set up? How long does it take to deploy? How deep is the learning? What kind of knowledge structure are they going to interact with in the 30 or 90 minutes that they're playing this game, right? How do we really get a database or a system that characterizes that? And that's the first thing that this project is going to look at, is this user-centered research to develop that for these 4 personas centering educators.
Oh, got it. So that's one of the goals of this, is to answer that question.
Right. Exactly. We're trying to get at those answers.
Yeah. Oh, that's great.
So there's one more piece. I'll pause here for any questions, but there's also the first piece of this that's part of a longer vision that we have of how Foundry 10 can uniquely use our resources and assets to take this to the next level and address, to basically take it further. do you have any questions on kind of the overarching goal of the project first?
I mean, this might be the segue into what you're asking, but yeah, what's the dream for adoption? What does it look like if this happens?
Yes, that's a good
Who
question.
uses it in what way, very practically?
Yeah. And so by the way, right, Sarah Jenna, feel free to chime in at any time. I don't have to do all this. But right. So in development of a schema, right, you usually have like a UML model, or you have like all of the elements, the controlled vocabularies, all of the, you know, whatever elements for knowledge organization that are deemed important and come out of it. That in and of itself is like the first product of this first piece of the project, right? This is all of the potential elements that could be used, and here are the ones most important to educators, and here are some ways that we've determined are the best ways to structure them. From then, you need to create an instantiation of that knowledge structure, right? You need to create a database, or you need to, and you know, in like librarianship, there's metadata standards and schemas, but then there's different database or software or tools that you use where you can have those elements and items represented in the system. Theoretically, you could have any number of systems that use this schema. Do you have anything to add while I try and fix this?
Yeah, so, you know, like, there's definitely the part where, as Travis said, like, trying to get some understanding from the users about what they need and then building the database. But also, the other part of user-centeredness come from like how we're actually organized the final sort of product, so the UX piece of it, right? So we're also trying to like ponder with different ideas of, you know, like we can have like very complex, sophisticated metadata record, but that doesn't mean that users will come and actually like read through it, right? So trying to find some like simpler visual ways so that people can understand the value of these kinds of games in a better way. So that's what we're also trying to do, and the sort of like a end goal is, I think what we really want to do is like try to build some kind of community around it, where there's definitely some things that we're gonna do to set up the database, but we really want this to be more like a crowdsourced thing, where we build a community of people, the teachers, educators who are really interested in games, and have a way so that they can also share their experience of using the game, right? That it's not just like we have a collection of these objects, but hey, I use this game and this is the wraparound programming or curriculum or plan that I had. And it worked really well. And this is something that maybe you can like try to use too. Like they're kind of like the teacher's big teacher resource. And you start building that so that it has that sort of like grassroots kind of nature of it. And you know, Foundry 10 can host like regular kind of meetings and events so they can come together and actually share this in person too. So that's sort of like the long-term goal is like we really want this community to come together so we can start sharing our knowledge about how to best utilize these games.
Right. And this is really the first part of three things that would be the greatest vision we have for this. We're waiting to see, of course, how this first round goes out. We're very curious to see what schema looks like, what's important to the educators. But you know, one thing we run into in academia is, of course, you can build a schema. It's one thing to build a schema and understand the best ways to organize data for users. It's quite another to instantiate it into a database. But Foundry 10, you know, we have the resources to actually build some sort of a database or a system that people could come in and use. And the metaphor that I like to use, and this would be the second phase, well, the bridging the first and second phase is building this database. And I like to use alltrails.com. I don't know if any of you are hikers or have been to alltrails.com, which reports, right? There's like data about the trail, the elevation, a map of the elevation game, the temperatures in particular months. But then you have play reports that are about like trail reports, like how many insects or when are there berries, and you know, there's just like a lot of information and data. And then you have people writing individual reports of when they sorry, my father's phone. Like, thank you. So I imagine there would be like an allplay.com. That's not what it would be called, but it would be the same thing. You would have this database of games that would match this metadata schema, but educators and people that have played this game that have these contributor accounts could go in and do like play reports. This is what I like, and you could do your context. I was in a 6th grade class with 27 kids. We had this many hours. It went like this, and then do some qualitative pieces in the report at the end. And that way, over time, as this gets built out, it's not only like educators can use this as a resource and you have build a community around it, but then you can begin to scrape that for data, looking for patterns in efficacy. You have all the metadata and then all of the reporting. You can look for different levels of efficacy and different insights into which aspects of these games might be most effective and things like that. And that ties into, we're hiring a machine learning specialist at Foundry 10. And we would very much love to goose the population of this database so that long range, that would be the 3rd and final phase, we could really use it as a data set. Anybody could use it as a data set for exploring, and looking for insights that might not be captured in other types of data. And the final last piece of this, what we can do is, because we're a philanthropy, at the end of this first phase of the project, we get the schema, we can instantiate a database, and we can build this, allplay.com or whatever we want to call it, which would be our version of a data collecting service. We have the philanthropic funding and the connections to mass distribute games to educators. We can do it purposively. Like, we definitely want to get 150, 200 classrooms with this set of games, a couple $100,000 of funding. Educators could just grab whatever funding they want for the games they want to use. And in exchange, we'll be just like, hey, can you do a play report for this when you're done? So we can like goose that, incentivize like that initial year of use with our sharing output and our philanthropy to make sure that we prime the pump, so to speak, to get that data moving and it becomes usable. And then it arrive at that third point in the future where maybe we can start scraping it using potentially machine learning tools and things like that, mine it for insights and that sort of thing. So that's the biggest version of this vision. This year, we're focusing on the schema, but over long term, we would like to really develop and solve this problem in the most robust way possible for educators.
Yeah, that's cool.
So I have a question. Hi, I'm Clay. How does the game developer factor into this system?
It's a good point. When we talked about it with the VGMS before, we weren't able to do a database, but they could make, like a developer could make their own contributor account and contribute their own metadata that they feel is reflective of their game. Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it. So it's like, okay, I'm gonna submit my game because I want it to be like in this collection, and I'm filling out all the metadata, and then because I have that, now I'm searchable, and then the educators would be like, oh, I'm using this game, and now I'm gonna add data based on the metadata, right?
Right. Yeah. So there'd be like the core metadata, or I should say the record of the game in the system. Yeah. But then new records could be created by like either the company that wants anybody can add it. We'd have authorized users, and a problem we'll have to, or a challenge we'll have to address is like making sure that it's safe and effective and there's no rogue actors or whatever. There's always going to be that aspect of managing kind of this. But I'm a big fan of commercial off-the-shelf games for learning. I use them a lot myself, and we would want any educator to be able to create an account and enter metadata for a game and like create a record for a game within limits, demonstrating that they can do it, so that potentially many thousands of games could eventually be up in there. It wouldn't be 2 or 3 people handling this. It would be a community, and we would have mechanisms for ensuring quality and cleanup and things for sure. It's always a critical thing we would need to manage, but we can throw a white net here.
Yeah. Very cool. Very cool.
A good question. Other questions?
So I'm curious. Hi, I'm Paul, researcher at Northeastern. Talking about game metadata, I feel like what people usually gravitate towards, something like on Board Game Geek, is what are the mechanics in this game? Yeah. What are the game-like features? I imagine that there might be some tension here between the things that are most relevant for educators and the things that are most relevant for gamers. Mm-hmm. Are you thinking to have both of those in here, or how do you think about that mix?
This is a good question. I mean, with our persona, we're most concerned about the educators. I mean, I think gamers have a lot of folksonomic stuff already. You want to?
Yeah, and like because our primary audience is like educators, because like the VGMS work that we have done so far is more generic in a sense that we have sort of like the core few number of metadata elements that we think is just useful for any organization that have game collection. But then we have like a sort of like a wider pool of, I think we have like 40 or 50 metadata elements that we thought like in general these would be of interest to various stakeholders. So we have already done that work in a sense. So for this project, it's really trying to target more of sort of like the educators, and I don't think it means that we have to necessarily limit it. Like there can be additional metadata field for people who want to add that data. But I think the core metadata that we're going to focus on like populating are going to be targeted for teachers.
Yeah. And that reminds me, we do want it to be interoperable with other schemas as well, right? Like theoretically, a lot of this should map to other schemas. It's not going to be done in complete isolation. And in fact, potentially like referencing other systems, right? So like the vault, right? Like there's no reason there couldn't be a field to link to one of the Chrome games in the vault for that entry for that game in the database. We want this to be interoperable. Like a lot of people are doing a lot of things to the greatest extent possible, making the metadata map well, crosswalk well to other schemas, you know, consistent across, but also referencing resources that, you know, that are not just ours. It's just one system among many. So
well, I guess that's the fundamental question that's banging around in my head is, well, first off, I'm not library science background. I'm around a lot of library science at an increasing rate these days, just based on some projects that I have got myself in the middle of somewhat accidentally. And I love library science, and I love the idea of library science. But my biggest kind of question that comes up, and I'm sorry if this is really rudimentary, but how does what example or what other example would help me understand what an organization or what a project like this looks like in another media format or in another library science environment? Or are there parallels? Because like games, that's a media, right? That's a big thing. So you could say books, right? So you got books, and then you could say, well, books that are used by educators. Okay, that's like a sub-classification kind of books. But then the data that describes them, how does that move in and through distributors and end users? And because I assume that that you're not trying to be the database that every like individual educator goes to. You're not trying to be the website that they all go to, or are you? And like, how do you think about the role? You can see my question here. I'm like, yeah. So how does this look like around film or literature or other domains that certainly have had, I would assume, similar initiatives?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so there are definitely like in the library of science, like one of the jokes that we have is one thing that's great about metadata is that there's so many metadata out there. Everybody's creating their own metadata, which kind of like goes against sort of like the core idea of the reason why we want to do this is so that we can kind of consolidate this effort in some way. But everybody's going out there and like just making new standards, and that but to some degree has happened in a lot of these different kind of media types. And a good example is actually when we're doing our own VGMS work. What prompted us to do it, like now 15 years ago or so,
2011.
yeah, was the biggest example, sort of more traditionally in the library site, is like the OCLC, like the database that we have, like the Library of Congress, right? Record that you can go and find it, and that is very centralized, and you have a system where there are specific catalogers who actually contribute to building that database, right? So it's all centralized. But for these like more specialized collection and specialized media, people realize that the generic one doesn't quite work well, right? So the temptation is that you go and try to build your own, which is also what we did. And very early on in that project, as time went by, we got to actually get connected with the games that like the folks at Stanford, folks in Japan at Ritsumeikan University.
I read some of your papers on that just recently, by the way, so I'm catching up.
Yeah. And then what we realized at that point, and that was the discussion that we also had, was like, oh, do we want to try to have like one central place, like portal for these game metadata? And we soon realized, because we also had people who are from these special collections and museums and other places, like everybody has their own kind of system in a way, right? And even if you conceptually like look at it as like, oh yeah, this is like a great set of metadata elements, they can't, like redo their database. They can't like redo the system that they already have in place, right? So the best way to utilize this was actually like taking the portion that works for you. So it might be sort of like a genre taxonomy or themes or something that's relevant to you. And you try to use it in the environment that is local, that works for your organization. And then the best thing that we can do is basically create this constellation so that people are aware of each other's work. And, like we don't have to necessarily work on like building the same taxonomy, for instance, that's like duplicating the work, but we can work on different parts of it, right? And trying to, make sure that we are maximizing our effort in that way. We felt that that was like a best direction to go. So yeah, if that helps, that's like a little bit of like the background.
It does. I really see it. You know what it is? It's somewhere between the phase one of like build the vocabulary and build the information science around it, and the phase two, which is the instantiation of it. It's somewhere in that is instantiation where it's like that can be so many things, right? Like that's like so many things, and I would assume that many of those things are actually just connections to things that already are there or already are working. So with that in mind, there's two like immediate needs of why I was so curious about this project that have come up in some of our conversations with researchers, right? So the two kind of, I would say the big connections that have come up have been, with the Vault as us thinking about being a distributor of classroom-ready learning games, which is a subcategory of all the possible games, and it's a subcategory of learning games because it's ones that are free and playable in Chromebooks and compatible with what we currently think of the technology it's built. Certainly within that, some of the needs we have are just discovering them has been. If there's just work that goes into that, and I would love a feed. If you had a database of all of them, that'd be fantastic. So finding them, cataloging them, certainly cataloging them in the way teachers think about them. And in that regard, we'll probably have some parallel efforts as we're running studies and focus groups with teachers, but I'm surprised with some of the ways they're describing how they want to find them. But some of the other work that we're doing there is trying to figure out how do they currently discover educational media generally, because they certainly are not looking for educational games as their primary. That's not where they start. They start with, I'm looking for educational materials, or I'm hanging out with educational communities. And so it's like learning the ecosystem. So that's like part one, is like, it would be really cool to see Vault benefit from the work that you're doing and connect into the work you're doing as a distributor and as like a frontline connection with a lot of teachers, because I think we're really spending a lot of effort doing that and are well positioned to do that. And then the second one on the research side is the unit of analyses of a game is so, we're just so at the beginning of this, right? It's like there's a whole field of educational data mining and learning analytics and assessment that is like just getting going in any real way, where the unit of analysis is an individual game. And I know we're like 20 years into this, but in reality, it's like everywhere you look is like low-hanging fruit right now. We are at the beginning of that field. And as soon as you let yourself dream about that, you know that the next step is going to be across games, right? It's like, so the unit of analysis has to grow across play and across different curricular instantiations of the use of games. And there's so many ways to open that unit of analysis beyond the individual game. So that leads us to a question that came up big time in our Carnegie Mellon workshop that we did earlier this year, which was we need a way to compare across games. And groups like PBS Kids have a big catalog, or like the Vault is now becoming a big catalog. And we're like, if we're going to look at a unit of analysis and a, let's say, assessment of human cognition, how do we line up the different sources we get across games? So that, I think everybody in the room, when we were like really arrived on that, we're like, uh-oh, like someone else is going to have to tell us like how to do that, because that's out of bounds for this team of educational data mining people. It's like someone else line that all up. So it sounds like you're potentially doing something.
No, it's a really good point, right? And even the way I think about it, I don't think of the way I work, an individual unit of analysis is a game. I look at pieces of games. I do like formal analysis, decomposing it, seeing how learners interact with different elements. Are they making the relationship connections between the conceptual components of the games or not, right? That's why, to me, I think a really pernicious problem is that it's related to mapping it across games, right? Like if I get this ecosystem card game, it looks really pretty, but there's like 5 concepts in it, right? Like the eagles eat the moles, and the moles eat the worms, and the worms eat the dirt. And then, you're really looking at the same concept in this paragraph. Whereas you have another game that's more robust, like Earth or something like that, where you actually have more mathematical modeling in the relationships. There's more concepts, there's more relationships, and they're more complex, right? Like how do you qualify or characterize that difference across games? And I know a lot of the work that you do, you have the ability within your Chrome games, right? You're collecting some of this like within game analytics, right? That's very impressive. But how do you represent the knowledge that's in the game, the number of concepts, the relationships between the concepts, right? It's not totally an abstract problem, but it's a complex problem that I think is necessary to solve from everything that I've seen and heard as part of the big solution to all of this, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think like ultimately at the end of the day, because we all have a lot of these different kinds of catalogs in a distributed system. And if we want to have a connecting point, like I think it has to be sort of like the game as a connecting point. So in Japan, they have done this like recent work because, as you can imagine, they have a lot of like anime games, like manga, and they also have a lot of these databases that are also like fan based, and they're trying to figure out how to actually, like, if it's about Dragon Ball Z, like how do we get every resource out there that talks about it, right? And they try to have that database and try to connect to different pieces of the different catalog or resources. But at the end of the day, all of them are going to look slightly different. Like here, you're going to have some catalog that focuses more on the model information, or maybe like the grassroots like teachers contribution and whatnot. But at the end, like the game is what's going to tie it. And I think for users, like what we know from the previous user studies is like they actually don't like going to just one place to solve that problem. It is more typical that they actually go and try to use what systems they're familiar with and try to stitch it together, right? So in a sense, I think that like distributed sort of like resource and just like showing people where there is and they can figure out how to use it is probably the way to go.
This point of the different. Oh,
I'm
sorry.
sorry.
I was gonna say this point of the different knowledge models in games. So you had the game with the more mathematical models, or the simple kind of worm eats the dirt sort of model. That
Yeah.
doesn't seem like a challenge that's unique to games. That seems like it would be more
No.
broadly applicable of educational material. Are there approaches that already do that in things like books or other media? I think this gets maybe back to was it David's earlier question of how does this fit in with other educational media that educators are seeking out? And I wonder
Sure.
how much of this metadata schema is distinct to games.
It's not like if you just look at right here, the IEEE loan, the learning object metadata, right? You can see like interactivity level is element 5.3 within the educational branch, right? Like this is something that and some of these are games, but it could be any learning object, like an interactive or a simulation applet or something, right? It You're absolutely right. There's a lot of common problems really with any interactive media or any media in general, and I think that games in particular are unique because, as far as I'm concerned, they're some of the most multimedia. You've got It's a high degree of interactivity and simulation and audio and video and everything.
Yeah. Yeah, McLuhan, I remember when I first encountered his writing, like in grad school, and you're like, video games are the media that encapsulates all the prior media.
Yes.
And I'm not sure there is another media that encapsulates games yet outside of big G games. So I find that to be interesting. I think so. A couple more comments on that. One of them would be, I'll just focus on like the area of like knowledge assessment within games, which again I would argue is an adolescent field at best, like just knowledge assessment in games.
Sure.
So within that, I think there's a case to be made that there's been excellent research done within certain domains, specifically mathematics, that have knowledge that is very decomposable, as people would say it, right? You can take long division, you can break it into 4 other parts. Those parts are well defined, and then you can. Yeah, exactly. That's good. Yeah, Eric said Carnegie Mellon's like ground zero.
100 maybe.
Right? Yeah. But you can create, knowledge components as they call them, and you can, and it works really well. And what's great about it is you can move across different programs that teach, long division, and there's like an equivalency that's there. And I love it. It's like so aspiring, to think of that. And then within other domains, some of the knowledge components, if you want to keep that vocabulary, they just get a lot messier and such. So there's almost like, how do we do the equivalency between this thing over here, computational modeling, and this other example of computational modeling? But I don't even know anyone that's like trying super hard right now to do
the
that.
Messy is a phrase I use a lot too. So yeah. It is messy. That's why it's a kind of a relatively untackled problem.
I think that there's a promise in all of this, though, which is that one of the biggest liabilities of any given individual game acting as an assessment of knowledge is that how contextualized the enactment of that knowledge is within the game is so specific. So if I could build the ultimate assessment, it would be on a platform, not on a game, right? I'd be looking for evidence for understanding computational modeling across 10 different games, where with a reasonable amount of validity, we've said these are equivalent. And therefore we've got 10 signals. And then I'm looking at basically like the reliability across all of those signals together to say, does someone understand computational modeling? So I'm very excited about what you're doing in the applied sense.
I'm actually kind of curious about coming more from that knowledge component modeling world of things and thinking about how we can identify opportunities for practice and such within games. But it seems to me like, so you're saying you want to identify the concepts that exist within a given game, or I'm going to call them knowledge components, but like, from whose perspective? Like from like, are they the ones the designer put in there? Are they the ones that you see an affordance for? Like, I feel like the potential for learning is like, there's both what's in the game as it's built, but then there's also how it's used within a classroom, right? And like, is there a space for that, or?
Yeah. It was like seeing people play our games as a reading text. You're like, we didn't design this game to be a reading game, but all of a sudden you're putting all your struggling readers on this game because you have to do so much reading in it, and they're reading more in the game than they normally do. And you're like, oh, that was not what we built this for, but so be it. If that helps, that's great. Yeah.
Yeah. In a different hat, I teach a class in educational game design, and one of my assignments is to have students go play existing educational games and then put them up against the framework we use in the class. I could easily see integrating something like this. I have a bunch of blog posts and a whole big list. But a thing I do tell them to do is like, don't tell me the learning objectives that you see in the marketing materials. Like, what do you actually see from playing the game that you think you're learning here? Because it's often not.
Trying to find a diagram I like to use, how I think about it.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying that's a good prompt of like, don't look at the marketing materials. Like, what is demonstrated? Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead. Were you gonna say something?
Oh, no, go for it.
Well, I'm just trying to dig this diagram out, but I can just kind of explain it, right? Like, we have like the domain of knowledge as we think it exists in the real world, whether it's chemistry or biology or whatever, right? Like, let's just say reality, we know, we can, epistemology, blah, blah, blah. But let's just say we have some way we think the world is, right? But then you have a process of design, right? Some designer is trying to model that in a game. Like, I wrote my dissertation on oxygen not included, has a lot of physics and chemistry and thermal transfer and all kinds of interesting stuff that you can goof off with. And pumps and systems and air pressure and whatnot, right? So like those are all modeled. You can model air pressure and chambers, and the pumps fail when there's too much pressure in the room, and the circuits behave authentic and they can melt above a certain load. So you have a designer that may or may not, depending if it's a designer working with somebody that knows the domain or making assumption, the model may or may not be correct. But there is some facsimile in the model in the game, right? We talk about that a lot in the field. Then you have the understanding that a youth is going to bring to it and interact with it, right? So it seems to me like maybe a piece of what you're asking is like, first of all, how do you know that model is correct? And that does always go back to the designer, right? Is it a designer making an educational game that is working with a domain expert, or is it somebody doing something that looks good? And there's always going to be, I think, a range of the way you can represent. Once you've moved away from the real world, everything, there's a degree of abstraction to it, right? Everything, there's a degree of abstraction. What is that degree? And is it accurate or not, right? Like, do we characterize that, and how do we characterize that when we talk about a game? And I think that's a point that we dance around a lot, but really we're trying to like address as part of this. I don't know if that exactly answers your question, but that's something that's at the heart of what all of this is about.
Yeah.
Yeah, so in a
Interesting.
way,
There isn't a-
create like the metadata record, and like we talked about asking the designer to actually help populate it. But also, like at the end of the day, like it has to be also crowdsourced by people who are using it, right? So we talked about commercial off-the-shelf games as an example. Like those are not designed with educational goals in mind at all, right? Like it is the people who are taking it and using it in a creative way that actually brings about that educational value. And like they are the people who's gonna be explaining and arguing the use in that way, not the developers. They are not making educational games, right? So in some way we have to capture both, where like there is sort of like the creative intention and how they want this game to be used, but there's also going to be the reality of people who are using it in all sorts of different ways. And I think that is actually more of like the knowledge part that we're trying to capture, the tacit knowledge that are out there. That's like, you can't get that if you just focus on like having the games, right? You have to involve people in like populating that for us.
Right.
Right.
That's why it's like super exciting that like we can see the creative use of the end users, not just like the designer's intention.
Right. So this is
That is
kind
a
of a
cool
model I
figure.
like to use sometimes. You have like the real domain, like the knowledge that exists in the real world. You have this process. The process of design turns it into a game model. That white square kind of represents all the other game things that aren't actually the knowledge. Then you got the process of play. Player's brain is a black box. They bring their own structure, which may to some degree align with the game model or the domain. And then you have this process with what we're trying to understand. And then think of this as dynamic. As they're going through that process of play, what in that black box changes and how does it shift? To me, part of this project is how do we characterize the level of detail between the domain and the game model, right? Like hyper abstract would be like 40%. I think that's too simple, but there's got to be some understandable way to do it, especially within the chemistry, the physics, or the concept, or whatever, right? We really want to be able to characterize that.
Right. Yeah. Cool.
I could imagine some it's an imaginary world that I'm imagining where every game designer followed an evidence-centered design process and had made explicit the knowledge model of the game and had already developed assessments within the game that were well documented. And then very objectively, you could say, well, these games were designed to measure these constructs. And with varying degrees of quality of them doing that. At least they claim to have, and we can look inside of how they did it, and later assess the reliability and validity of that assessment. But right now, I feel like we're at the phase where there's like a few dozen papers that exist in all the literature where anybody has done halfway decent assessment in a game, and those games probably aren't playable because they were used within one lab for one study once. And the amount of like games that are actually in the public that do any sort of assessment with any sort of sophistication,
Right.
there's like between 0 and 3 that I'm aware of that are like out there. So I'm really, I can imagine it moving in that direction more and more.
Right.
Certainly, we're doing the work to try to do that, but
Yeah.
slow. Expensive.
I feel like, I feel like I'm trying to do that, like, build games around evidence-based, and it's really, really hard. But it's also like, you're never going to convince everybody to do evidence-based design, even for learning games, right? But there's that. So if I looked at that slide where you've got the black box, that's the player.
Oh, yeah.
What you need is like the bridge that goes from like the game model to the researcher. That's like, it allows you to surface things in the game, but because like that is open game data, right? But it's the unknowns of the game model. Like when Portal came out, it wasn't like, this is going to be used in a classroom. But then when somebody wants to use Portal, if Portal had surfaced almost like a tagging system on specific events or things that it was like, yeah, you can measure A and B, so that the researcher could then tack on the bridge. And then I think that would allow you to kind of get at more evidence-based.
Portal was part of open game data and made every signal of the game model and the player interaction model available to researchers. Whoa. And then we knew that people are using Portal in a certain way. We could go back and develop the detectors that would find evidence of those ways of using it within the game signals that are there.
Right.
But that would require the developer to give full transparency to their data analytics.
So if you know a guy.
Yes, if you know a guy. Because that would be really cool to use teachers to surface those things and then go back and do the data work that would allow us to do it in real time once you know what you're looking for.
For real, yeah. And I think I like to do a formal analysis of games that I work with. Formal analysis of games and gameplay. I like to, I can pretty astute at mapping relationships and components, their relationships, the interactivity, and all of those sorts of things. So, but I think that is a piece of this as well. We do have to go. We all have other meetings.
Yeah.
But no, this is a great chat. I don't know if you want to do some sort of a follow-up, or if you have additional questions, feel free to reach out. If there's stuff you want to share with us.
Did you guys get on the Slack?
We're gonna get on the Slack. I'm gonna join this afternoon.
Cool.
Good.
So we can easily follow up there. Yeah, I have some follow-up thoughts as well. But for the wrapping up, if we're at time, end of recording, whatever. Thank you all for being here. We'll see you in 2 more weeks. I think I'm on the schedule in 2 weeks, actually.
You are.
Is that the data schema one or the learning curve?
I think you're doing learning
one?
curves.
Okay, so if you want to see an analysis of how we play with learning curves and knowledge components and stuff, and
Thank you.
games, come and see that. But otherwise, we'll see you all in 2 weeks, and keep in touch.
Thanks, Raisa.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was fun. Good to see you.